3 years of failure had turned the research chamber into a graveyard of abandoned equipment. Cables snaked across the floor like dead vines, connecting machines that hummed with pointless energy. Holographic displays flickered with error messages in 17 different languages, each one a testament to another failed attempt. At the center of it all sat the precursor database, a massive crystalline structure that rose 30 feet toward the vaulted ceiling. Its surface smooth and dark as obsidian, completely unresponsive to everything the galaxy's best minds had thrown at it. Whisper of Stars preened her luminescent feathers in frustration, a nervous habit she had developed over the long months. Her species, the Avari, had mapped quantum foam and built cities in the hearts of neutron stars. Yet this ancient artifact refused to acknowledge their existence. She watched Granite Mind adjust another set of resonance emitters around the database's base, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's dim light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Perhaps if we synchronize the harmonic frequency with the substrate's molecular vibration pattern, Granite Mind suggested, his voice like wind chimes in a storm, the Lithians processed information 1,000 times faster than organic minds, solving mathematical problems that would take others centuries. None of that brilliance mattered here. Flowing current bubbled agreement from within her mobile water suit, the liquid-filled transparent sphere that allowed her to move through air-filled environments. The Aquari had developed psionic abilities that could bend space-time itself, reading thoughts across star systems and moving objects with pure mental force. She had tried reaching out to the database with her mind for weeks, searching for any flicker of consciousness or machine intelligence. Nothing. It was like screaming into an empty void. The database had been discovered orbiting this dead star system 5 years ago, hidden among the ruins of a civilization so ancient that even their name had been lost to time. The precursors, as the galactic community called them, had vanished millions of years before the first spacefaring species had developed written language. Their technology surpassed anything currently known, and this database represented the single largest find in archaeological history. If they could access it, the knowledge inside could advance every species by millennia, if they could access it. David Reed stood at the chamber entrance, his worn travel bag slung over one shoulder, taking in the scene with quiet observation. He had arrived on Perihelion 7 only 6 hours ago, fresh from Earth's diplomatic shuttle, and already he could feel the weight of expectations pressing down on him. Humanity's representative to the most important discovery in galactic history. No pressure. Whisper of Stars noticed him first, her large golden eyes fixing on the newcomer with barely concealed skepticism. Humans had joined the galactic community only 15 years ago, stumbling into faster-than-light travel through what other species considered laughably primitive brute force engineering. They had no psionic abilities, no quantum computing capacity built into their biology, no collective consciousness or hive mind advantages, just basic organic brains and stubborn determination. "You must be the human," Whisper of Stars said, her translator rendering her melodic language into flat galactic standard. "We received word of your arrival. I apologize, but we are quite busy with our work." David smiled, a gesture he had learned many species found confusing. "I understand. I'm just here to observe and learn. Don't let me interrupt." Granite Mind turned his attention from the emitters, his crystalline face impossible to read but his tone clearly dismissive. "Observe if you wish, though I suspect our methods will be beyond your current understanding. We have attempted quantum entanglement protocols, temporal resonance cascades, psionic interface bridging, and multidimensional harmonic analysis. All have failed." "Sounds thorough," David said, stepping carefully around the cables as he approached the database. He set his bag down and walked slowly around the massive structure, his eyes not on the crystalline surface but on the chamber itself. Flowing Current's voice rippled through her translator. "Forgive Granite Mind's directness. We are all frustrated. 3 years is a long time to achieve nothing. What expertise do you bring to this effort?" "I'm a linguist and cultural anthropologist," David replied, running his hand along the chamber wall. "I study how people communicate and build societies." Whisper of Stars ruffled her feathers. "This is not a person. This is a machine. A database. It requires technical expertise, not social analysis." "Maybe," David said softly, noticing something odd about the wall carvings. They weren't technical schematics or mathematical formulas. They looked like decoration. Art even. Or maybe we've been thinking about it wrong. The three researchers exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them in the way of colleagues who had worked together for too long. The human was naive, clearly out of his depth and wasting their time with primitive assumptions. But protocol demanded they at least pretend to consider his presence useful. "You are welcome to examine the database," Whisper of Stars said with forced politeness. "Though I warn you, better minds than any of ours have tried and failed." The collective consciousness of the hive world spent 2 months in direct meditation with it. The Temporal Academy sent their best chrono engineers. Even the machine Concordat, whose entire civilization is artificial intelligence, could not establish a connection. David nodded, still studying the chamber. The architecture was strange. The database sat on a raised platform, but the approach wasn't grand or ceremonial in the way he would expect for something important. Instead, the path toward it was casual, comfortable with what looked like seating areas nearby. The walls held niches that might have displayed personal items. This didn't look like a vault or a laboratory. It looked like someone's home. "Could I have some time alone with it?" David asked. The three researchers stared at him. Whisper of Stars tilted her head almost 90 degrees, a gesture of complete confusion in her species. "Alone, why?" "Just to think." 20 minutes? Granite Mind's body chimed with what his species used as laughter. 20 minutes alone will accomplish what 3 years of collaborative effort could not. "Probably not," David admitted. "But I'd like to try." Flowing Current bubbled thoughtfully. "Let him try. What harm could it do? We are achieving nothing as it is." Whisper of Stars sighed, a very human gesture she had picked up from other species. "Very well. 20 minutes. We will monitor from the observation room. Please do not damage anything." "I won't," David promised. The three researchers filed out, their various forms of locomotion creating a symphony of footsteps, crystal chimes, and liquid sloshing. The door sealed behind them with a soft hiss, leaving David alone in the chamber with the silent database. He stood there for a moment, just breathing, letting the silence settle around him. Then he approached the database directly, not as a scientist approaching a mystery, not as a researcher approaching a puzzle, but as a person approaching another person's space. David cleared his throat and spoke a single word into the stillness. "Hello." The database exploded with light. Light poured from every surface of the crystalline structure. Not the harsh white glare of activated technology, but something warmer, almost golden, pulsing in rhythms that seemed almost like breathing. David stumbled backward, shielding his eyes as the chamber transformed from a dim research space into something alive with illumination. Sound followed the light, a deep harmonic resonance that he felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears, vibrating through the floor and up through his bones. The observation room door burst open and Whisper of Stars practically flew through it, her wings spread wide in shock. Granite Mind followed, moving faster than David had seen him move before, his crystalline body refracting the database's light into a dazzling array of colors. Flowing Current's sphere rolled through the entrance, her aquatic form pressing against the transparent walls of her suit as she tried to process what she was witnessing. "Impossible," Granite Mind whispered, and David realized it was the first time he had heard genuine emotion in the Lithian's voice. "Completely impossible." Whisper of Stars circled the database, her instruments already out and scanning, her feathers standing on end. "All systems are active. Full power distribution across the entire structure. Neural pathways equivalent to 17 million organic brains operating simultaneously." "How? What did you do?" David was still staring at the database, watching patterns of light chase each other across its surface like thoughts moving too fast to follow. "I said hello." "You said what?" Flowing Current asked, her translator struggling to capture her tone of disbelief. "Hello? I just said hello." Granite Mind's body produced a sharp, discordant note. "That is not possible. We have transmitted greetings in 4,000 languages, including every known precursor dialect we have managed to reconstruct. Standard protocol includes establishing peaceful intent through multilingual introduction. We completed that process in the first week." "But did you mean it?" David asked quietly, his eyes never leaving the database. "Or were you just following a checklist?" Before anyone could respond, the light from the database coalesced into a form, a holographic projection rising from the crystal surface. It was vaguely humanoid, though its proportions were wrong, its features abstract and shifting. Most striking were the symbols that appeared around it, floating in the air like three-dimensional writing, constantly moving and rearranging themselves. Whisper of Stars instruments chirped frantically. Unknown language. No match in any database. Sentence structure is nonlinear. Grammatical rules appear to shift based on context. This is unlike anything we have encountered. The holographic figure turned toward David, and though it had no discernible face, he felt the weight of its attention. The symbols around it began to move faster, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly, like trying to see in too many dimensions at once. "It's trying to communicate," David said, taking a step closer. "But we don't share a common language." "Obviously," Granite Mind said, his processors already working to analyze the symbol patterns. "It will take months to establish a basic translation matrix, possibly years to achieve meaningful communication. We should begin documenting everything immediately." Whisper of Stars, start recording all symbol variations. Flowing current, monitor the energy patterns for... "Wait," David interrupted, holding up a hand. "Just wait a moment." The three researchers fell silent, more from shock at being interrupted than agreement. David moved closer to the holographic figure, ignoring the warning chirps from Whisper of Stars instruments about potentially dangerous energy readings. "You're trying to talk to us," David said. Not to his colleagues, but to the database itself. "You're trying to find a way to bridge the gap. That's what all these changing symbols mean, isn't it? You're testing different approaches, looking for something we can understand." The holographic figure stilled. The symbols stopped their frantic movement and hung suspended in the air. Then slowly they began to change, their alien geometry simplifying, becoming less complex, more geometric, more like the mathematical notation that Granite Mind used in his calculations. "Fascinating," Granite Mind breathed. "It is adapting its communication method based on your observation. But why would it respond to your speculation and not our systematic analysis?" "Because I'm not analyzing it," David said. "I'm talking to it." "There's a difference." Flowing current moved closer, her psionic senses extended. "I detect no consciousness in the traditional sense. This is not a living mind, yet it behaves as if it has intent, purpose. How can a machine care about being understood rather than simply transferring data?" David smiled. "Maybe that's exactly what it was built to do. Not just store information, but share it, actually communicate it." Over the next several hours, they watched the database cycle through different approaches to communication. Mathematical formulas gave way to musical notation, which transformed into color patterns, then into what looked like artistic representations. Each iteration was simpler than the last, the database slowly reducing the complexity of its attempts, searching for common ground. Whisper of Stars grew increasingly frustrated. "This is incredibly inefficient. We should be developing a proper translation algorithm, not waiting for the database to randomly stumble upon a method we can interpret." "It's not random," David said. "Look at the progression. It's methodical. It started with the most complex forms of expression and is working its way down to simpler ones. It's trying to meet us where we are." "Then let us help it," Granite Mind insisted. He approached the database and projected a series of mathematical proofs, fundamental equations that any advanced civilization would recognize. The database's holographic figure turned toward him, the symbols around it shifting to match his equations. For a moment it seemed like progress. Then the symbols froze and the hologram flickered. The database's light dimmed slightly, and the sense of active communication faded. It had withdrawn. "What happened?" Whisper of Stars demanded. David understood immediately. "You tried to take control of the conversation. You tried to impose your method of communication instead of letting it find common ground naturally." "That is absurd," Granite Mind replied. "I was facilitating the process, providing clear reference points for translation. You were treating it like a puzzle to be solved instead of a person trying to talk to you. It is not a person." Granite Mind's voice rose, his usual calm shattered by frustration. "It is an information storage system. An extremely sophisticated one, certainly, but ultimately just a very complex machine." David looked at the dimmed database, at the holographic figure that had stopped moving, frozen in whatever alien equivalent of disappointment it could express. "Is it? Because right now it feels like we hurt its feelings." Flowing current's water rippled with agitation. "Machines do not have feelings. They process inputs and generate outputs according to their programming. Anthropomorphization is a known cognitive bias, especially among species with strong social bonding instincts. You are projecting human emotional patterns onto an inanimate object. Maybe, David admitted. Or maybe the precursors built something different than anything you've encountered before. Something that doesn't fit into your categories of alive or not alive, conscious or not conscious. Whisper of Stars folded her wings tightly against her body. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop trying to access it like it's a locked door and start trying to communicate with it like it's someone who wants to talk but doesn't speak our language. Yet, Granite Mind's body chimed with skepticism. And your evidence for this approach is that you said one word and it activated? Yes. That is not sufficient data for establishing a methodology. You're right, David agreed. But 3 years of your methodology got you nothing. 5 minutes of mine got it to wake up. Maybe that's worth considering. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the soft hum of the database's reduced power state. The three researchers looked at each other, centuries of scientific training warring with the undeniable evidence before them. Everything they knew said that machines were tools to be understood through analysis, measurement, and systematic study. Everything they believed said that communication required establishing protocols, finding common reference points, building translation matrices through careful comparison. Everything they had tried had failed. Whisper of Stars was the first to break the silence. What do you propose? David approached the database again, slowly, the way one might approach a nervous animal. He kept his movements gentle, non-threatening. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I propose we treat it with patience. Let it set the pace. Respond when it reaches out, but don't force our own methods onto it. Think of it less like decryption and more like getting to know someone who speaks a completely different language. The holographic figure flickered, and its light began to grow brighter again. The symbols reappeared, starting simple this time. Basic geometric shapes that slowly increased in complexity as the database gauged their reaction. David sat down on the floor, cross-legged, his posture open and relaxed. See? It's trying again. It just needed to know we were willing to listen on its terms. Flowing Current settled her sphere next to him, her curiosity overcoming her skepticism. Whisper of Stars perched nearby, her instrument set to passive monitoring rather than active scanning. Even Granite Mind, after a long moment of internal calculation, lowered himself to the floor in what passed for a sitting position among his kind. Together, they watched the database begin its patient work of teaching them how to understand. And for the first time in 3 years, it felt like actual progress. 17 days passed in a pattern that would have seemed bizarre to any outsider observing the research chamber. Each morning, David arrived first and spent 10 minutes simply sitting with the database, sometimes talking about nothing important, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. The database would activate when he arrived, its golden light filling the chamber like a greeting. The other researchers had stopped questioning this ritual after the 3rd day, when they tried to skip it, and the database remained dormant until David performed his morning routine. Whisper of Stars had taken to joining him on the 5th day. Though she still fidgeted with her instruments out of habit, Granite Mind arrived on the 7th day with what he called an open processor, willing to observe without immediately analyzing. Flowing Current had been the quickest to adapt, her species' natural patience serving her well in this strange new approach to research. The database's communication had evolved considerably. It no longer overwhelmed them with complex alien symbols, but instead projected simple images, testing their understanding with each new concept. A sphere might represent a planet or a bubble or a concept of wholeness, the database cycling through different contexts until they grasped the distinction. It was teaching them its language through immersion, the way a parent might teach a child, and the process required a kind of patience that scientific research rarely demanded. It showed me something interesting yesterday, David said during their afternoon session, watching the holographic figure shift through different forms. After everyone left, I think it was waiting until we were alone. Whisper of Stars tilted her head. Why would it differentiate between private and group communication? Because sometimes things are easier to share one-on-one. Less pressure, more personal. Granite Mind's processors hummed with confusion. Personal implies emotional investment. Emotional investment implies consciousness. You are again anthropomorphizing. Maybe I am, David replied. But it works, doesn't it? We've learned more in 2 weeks than you did in 3 years. At some point, You have to ask if being right about what it is matters more than actually communicating with it. The database projected a new image, more complex than previous ones. It showed figures, clearly meant to represent the precursors themselves. Tall and slender with elongated limbs and heads that seemed too large for their bodies. They were gathered in groups engaged in what looked like conversation or celebration. The scene radiated warmth and connection. Then the image shifted. The same figures appeared, but now they stood apart from each other, isolated, their body language rigid and formal. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and efficient. The figures moved with mechanical precision, performing tasks with perfect coordination but no apparent joy or spontaneity. "What is it trying to tell us?" Flowing Current asked, her water rippling with interest. David watched the images cycle between the two states, warm connection and cold efficiency, over and over like a comparison, or perhaps a warning. "I think it's showing us what happened to them, to the precursors. They changed somehow, lost something." The database seemed to respond to his interpretation, the images stabilizing on the cold, isolated figures. New symbols appeared, ones they had learned meant negation or loss. Something had been taken away, something important. Whisper of Stars recorded everything, her scientific training demanding documentation even as her understanding of the process evolved. If you are correct, this suggests the precursors underwent a fundamental cultural transformation. But why show us this? Why not simply provide technical data or historical records? "Because this is what it wants us to understand first," David said softly. "Not how they built their technology or organized their society, but what they lost. What went wrong?" Granite Mind projected his own images into the space, careful not to interrupt but offering his analysis. Mathematical representations of societal complexity, efficiency curves, optimization algorithms. The database watched his contribution but did not incorporate it into its lesson. Instead, it returned to the same images, the same comparison between warmth and coldness, connection and isolation. "It is rejecting my analysis," Granite Mind observed, though his tone held curiosity rather than offense now. "Interesting. It wants us to understand emotionally before we understand intellectually." "Understanding emotionally is a form of intelligence," David pointed out. "Just a different kind than you're used to prioritizing." The database projected something new, an image of a single precursor figure standing before what was unmistakably the database itself. Though in its pristine original state, surrounded by what looked like home furnishings, the figure reached out and touched the surface and the database responded with light and symbols. The gesture was casual, familiar, the way someone might greet an old friend. "This was in someone's home," David said, the pieces clicking together in his mind. The database wasn't in a government building or research facility. It was personal, domestic. Whisper of Stars spread her wings in surprise. Impossible. Technology of this sophistication would be heavily controlled, restricted to authorized personnel. No civilization would place such a powerful artifact in a private dwelling. "Why not?" David asked. "We put books in our homes, computers, art, things that are valuable and important to us personally, not just professionally." Flowing Current's sphere rotated as she considered this. "But this contains potentially the sum total of precursor knowledge. The equivalent of every library, every database, every information repository of their entire civilization. Keeping it in a home would be like storing your species' entire cultural heritage in a single person's bedroom." "Or," David said slowly, watching the database's images, "it means access to knowledge wasn't restricted. It was available to everyone, integrated into daily life. This wasn't a vault or a secure facility. It was like having the internet in your living room." The database pulsed with bright light, the golden glow intensifying. The holographic figure seemed to stand taller, its form more defined. Agreement. Understanding. David had grasped something important. Granite Mind processed this revelation, his crystalline structure refracting patterns of light as he thought. If that is accurate, it explains much. The database was designed for casual interaction, for beings who approached it as part of their daily routine, rather than as a sacred or secure object. Our formal, protocol-driven methods would seem alien to its design parameters. "Not just alien," David said. "Threatening maybe, or sad. Imagine being built to be someone's companion, part of their everyday life, And then millennia later, the first contact you have is beings treating you like a locked safe they need to crack open. Whisper of Stars made a soft sound, her species equivalent of a sigh. I am beginning to understand your perspective. We have been approaching this as a retrieval operation, when we should have been approaching it as first contact. The database showed them more images over the next hours, a story unfolding in pictures and symbols they were learning to read. The precursors had been intensely social, their lives woven together with art and conversation and shared experiences. Their technology served their lives rather than the other way around. Then something changed. The images showed them becoming more focused, more driven toward perfection and efficiency. Their art became formulaic, optimized for aesthetic impact rather than genuine expression. Their conversations became information exchanges, efficient but empty. The warmth drained out of their civilization degree by degree, so slowly they might not have noticed until it was too late. They became better at everything and worse at being themselves. Their technology advanced while their culture atrophied. Eventually, the images showed, they created machines that could think better than they could, optimize better than they could, achieve perfection they could no longer match. And then the precursors simply faded from the images, leaving behind only their machines and empty cities. The research chamber fell silent as the implications settled over them. Whisper of Stars' feathers drooped. Granite Mine's usual luminescence dimmed. Flowing Current's water stilled completely in her sphere. They optimized themselves out of existence, Granite Mind whispered, and for the first time David heard something like horror in his voice. The database projected one final image, the precursor touching the database's surface. That moment of casual connection and warmth, and then symbols appeared around it. The team had learned enough of the database's language to understand the message. Remember, preserve, warn. This isn't just a knowledge repository, David said. It's a memorial, a warning left behind by a species that realized too late what they had lost. They sealed it away, locked it, made it so only someone who still understood connection and warmth could open it. That is why it responded to you, Whisper of Stars said, understanding dawning. Not because humans are special, but because you approached it as a person approaches another person. With simple warmth. With hello. The database's light pulsed gently and new symbols appeared. These were different from before, simpler but somehow more important. A question. David studied them, working through the grammar they had been learning, the context they had been building. The database was asking something fundamental, something that would determine what happened next. I think, he said carefully, it's asking us if we understand. Not just intellectually, but really understand. If we've learned what it was trying to teach us. And if we have, Flowing Current asked, then I think it will start showing us everything else. All the knowledge the precursors preserved. But only if we prove we understand the lesson first. Only if we can show we won't make the same mistakes they did. The holographic figure stood waiting, patient and ancient, a teacher who had waited millions of years for students who would truly listen. The question hung in the air, and David realized that their answer would determine not just what they learned from the precursors, but what kind of future the galaxy would build. David spent most of that night walking the observation decks of Perihelion 7, watching the dead star system spin slowly beyond the reinforced windows. Somewhere down on one of those lifeless worlds, the precursors had lived and built their civilization and eventually disappeared, leaving behind only ruins and questions and one incredibly sophisticated warning system disguised as a database. He thought about efficiency and optimization, about how easy it was to lose yourself in the pursuit of being better, faster, smarter, more perfect. His own species was young in galactic terms, barely a teenager compared to the ancient civilizations that dominated the political landscape. Humanity had been overwhelmed by the technological gap when they first made contact, struggling to understand machines and methods that seemed like magic. Many humans felt inferior, desperate to catch up, willing to sacrifice anything to close the gap with species that had thousands or millions of years head start maybe. That desperation to advance was exactly what the precursors would have warned against. When he returned to the research chamber in the morning, he found the others already there, each lost in their own thoughts. Whisper of Stars stood before the dormant database, her instruments set aside for once, just looking at it with her large eyes. Granite Mind sat perfectly still, his crystalline body dim as he processed internal calculations. Flowing current sphere rested on the floor, her aquatic form drifting in slow, meditative circles. "I have been thinking," Whisper of Stars said without preamble when David entered, "about my own species. The Avari were not always as we are now. Our oldest histories speak of a time when we were different, less focused on achievement and more on experience. We called those ancestors primitive and celebrated our evolution beyond them. But were we right to do so?" Granite Mind's body chimed softly. "The Lithians chose our current form. We were once organic beings, fragile and short-lived. We transferred our consciousness to crystalline matrices to achieve immortality and perfect logic. We left behind emotion and instinct as weaknesses to be overcome. We thought ourselves superior to our ancestors. Now I wonder if we simply became different, not better. My people live in collective consciousness," Flowing Current added. "Each Aquari mind touches all others in our oceans. We share thoughts instantly, achieve perfect coordination, never feel alone. But our oldest legends speak of a time before the connection, when each mind was separate. We view that isolation as a dark age we escaped, yet I find myself wondering what we lost when we stopped being individuals." David listened to their reflections, understanding that the database's lesson had reached deeper than any of them expected. "The database is asking us if we learned something, but I don't think it wants a verbal answer. I think it wants to see if we actually change our approach. If we can prove we understand by how we act." "How do we prove that?" Whisper of Stars asked. "By not treating it like a machine anymore. By not treating anything like just a machine. By remembering that efficiency isn't everything." The database activated as they settled into their now familiar positions around it. But something was different this time. The holographic figure appeared larger, more detailed, and the symbols that surrounded it were clearer, more organized. It had been waiting for them to understand, and now it was ready to share more. Images began flowing from the database, but these were different from the historical scenes they had witnessed before. These showed technology, incredible technology, devices and methods that made current galactic science look primitive by comparison. Energy systems that pulled power directly from the fabric of space-time. Medical treatments that could heal any injury, cure any disease, extend life indefinitely. Terraforming techniques that could transform dead worlds into paradises in decades rather than millennia. Manufacturing processes that could replicate any object perfectly from base materials. Granite Mind's processors went into overdrive trying to capture and analyze everything. Whisper of Stars' instruments chirped frantically as they recorded data streams beyond anything they had seen. Even Flowing Current extended her psionic senses to their limit, trying to absorb as much as possible. But David noticed something else. Between each technical revelation, the database inserted images of precursors using these technologies. Not in laboratories or industrial facilities, but in homes and gardens and gathering places. The medicine being used to heal a child's scraped knee. The energy systems powering lights for a festival. The manufacturing creating toys and art supplies. Every piece of technology served life rather than replacing it. "Look at the context," David said, pointing to the images. "They're not just showing us how these things work. They're showing us how they were meant to be used. Technology that enhanced life without dominating it." The database pulsed in agreement and the images shifted to show what came later, after the change. The same technologies now used differently. Medicine used to eliminate all imperfection, creating beings that were flawless but somehow less vibrant. Energy systems powering massive computational arrays instead of homes. Manufacturing focused on optimization and efficiency rather than creativity or joy. They turned their tools into masters, Whisper of Stars breathed. They had everything they needed to live well, but they could not resist the urge to make everything perfect. And perfection killed them. More images flowed, and the database began revealing its own nature. It had been created in the final days of precursor civilization, by a group who recognized what was happening. They had built it not just to preserve knowledge, but to preserve understanding. The wisdom of how to live well rather than just live efficiently. They filled it with technical data, yes, but also with art and music and philosophy and all the messy, imperfect, beautiful things that made life worth living. Then they locked it. The security system was brilliant in its simplicity. Only someone who still understood warmth, connection, spontaneous social interaction, the simple act of greeting another consciousness with genuine openness could access it. Any species that had optimized away those inefficient social behaviors would find the database forever sealed. It is a filter. Granite Mind said, his voice filled with something like awe. They designed it to screen for the very qualities they had lost. Brilliant. The database showed them one more set of images, and these made David's breath catch. They showed possible futures, branching paths that civilizations might take. One path showed the galaxy following the precursors into cold efficiency, each species gradually optimizing away everything that made them unique until nothing remained but perfectly efficient machines, processing an empty universe. Another path showed species learning from the warning, maintaining their warmth and connection while advancing technologically, creating a galaxy that was both advanced and alive. Between these images, the database projected a symbol they had learned meant choice. It is asking us which path we will take, Flowing Current said softly, not predicting, not dictating, asking, hoping we will choose wisely. David stood and approached the database directly, close enough that the holographic figure was right before him. We understand, he said, speaking not just for himself but for all of them. We see what you're trying to teach us. You're giving us all this knowledge, all this power, but you're trusting us to use it wisely, to not let it consume us the way it consumed your creators. The holographic figure reached out, and though it was just light and had no substance, David felt the gesture's weight. An offer, a partnership, a hope that this time would be different. But we need help, David continued. We need more than just technical data. We need to understand how you balance things, how you kept technology from becoming an end in itself. Can you teach us that? The database's response was immediate and overwhelming. New images flooded the space around them, but these were different from anything before. These were lessons in philosophy, in ethics, in the art of living well. The precursors had studied these things as seriously as they studied science, had developed frameworks for maintaining humanity, individuality, warmth, and connection, even as their capabilities expanded. Whisper of Stars was recording everything, but David noticed she kept stopping to actually look at the images themselves, to engage with the ideas rather than just document them. Granite Mind had slowed his processing speed, taking time to consider each concept fully rather than rushing through analysis. Flowing Current had opened her psionic senses not to scan but to feel, to experience the emotional resonance of what they were being shown. They were learning, truly learning in a way that went beyond data acquisition. Hours passed as the database shared its treasures, each technical marvel paired with wisdom about its proper use, each powerful capability balanced with warnings about its dangers. The precursors had learned these lessons the hard way, and they had recorded it all, hoping that someone someday would have the wisdom to listen and the strength to choose differently. As the session drew to a close and the database's light began to dim for the evening, David asked one final question. Why us? Why did you wait all this time? You've been here for millions of years. Other species have come. Civilizations more advanced than any of ours. Why open now? The database projected its answer in images that needed no translation. It showed species after species approaching over the eons. Each one brilliant, each one advanced, each one so focused on accessing the database as a resource that none of them stopped to simply say hello. They came with tools and methods and determination, but without warmth. They came to take, not to connect. Then it showed David, walking into the chamber, looking around with curiosity rather than hunger, speaking a simple greeting to what everyone else saw as a machine. One word, hello. The first time in millions of years someone had approached as a friend rather than a thief. We were not special, Whisper of Stars said quietly. We were just finally humble enough to let the human show us a different way. If we had come without David, we would have failed too. Granite Mind's crystalline body glowed with soft light. The human did not succeed because humans are superior. He succeeded because his species has not yet had time to optimize away their social instincts. They still treat everything as potentially worthy of connection. Which means, Flowing Current added, that the real test is not whether we can access this knowledge, but whether we can keep that perspective as we advance, whether we can stay warm while growing powerful. The database pulsed one final time and a new symbol appeared, one they had not seen before. David studied it, working through the grammar and context they had learned. I think, he said slowly, it just asked us to share what we have learned. Not just the technology, but the wisdom, to teach other species the same lesson it taught us. A responsibility, Whisper of Stars said. It is giving us this knowledge, but in exchange we must become teachers ourselves. preservers of the lesson. I can accept that, Granite Mind said, and the others murmured agreement. The holographic figure bowed, a gesture of respect and gratitude that needed no translation. Then it faded and the database's light dimmed to a soft ambient glow, not shut down or sealed but resting, waiting for them to return tomorrow and continue learning. David and his colleagues sat in the quiet chamber, each processing what they had experienced. They had found the greatest treasure in galactic history, but it came with a price and a promise. The knowledge would change everything, could lift every species to heights the precursors had reached and beyond. But only if they remembered the lesson, only if they kept the warmth. News of the database's activation spread through the galaxy faster than light, carried by quantum communication networks that connected thousands of worlds. Within 3 days, Perihelion 7 went from a quiet research station to the most important location in known space. Ships arrived hourly, bringing representatives from every major civilization, minor species hoping for recognition, corporate interests seeking profit, and military officials calculating strategic advantages. David watched the station's docking bays fill with vessels through the observation windows and felt a knot forming in his stomach. The database had opened because someone finally approached it with warmth and patience. Now an army of interests was descending, each one viewing it primarily as an asset to be exploited. They are requesting immediate access, Whisper of Stars said, reviewing the flood of official communications. The Grand Council, the military coalition, the technology consortium, the academic collective. Everyone with any authority is demanding to see the database personally. Some are threatening political consequences if we refuse. Granite Mind's crystalline structure flickered with agitation. They are already treating this as a resource to be divided rather than a teacher to be learned from. They have not understood anything. Flowing current drifted in her sphere, her aquatic form tense. We cannot simply refuse them all. We lack the authority. The station is open space, technically under Grand Council jurisdiction. They could override us and enter the research chamber by force if they chose. Would the database respond to them? David asked. If they storm in demanding access, will it share what it's been teaching us? The question hung in the air. They all knew the answer. The database had sealed itself for millions of years, waiting for someone who approached correctly. It would not suddenly abandon its principles because important people demanded an audience. The first delegation arrived within the hour. Ambassador Prime Logic of the Calculation Worlds led a group of 7 species representatives, each one dressed in ceremonial attire that spoke of rank and authority. Prime Logic was a being of pure, crystallized thought, similar to Granite Mind species but older, larger, more powerful. His form refracted light into complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. We appreciate your preliminary work, Prime Logic said without greeting or introduction, his voice carrying the weight of countless worlds behind it. However, this discovery is too important to remain in the hands of a small research team. The Grand Council has voted to assume direct control of the database and establish a proper access committee. You will turn over all data immediately and vacate the research chamber. David felt the others looking at him, waiting for his response. Somehow he had become the spokesperson, the human who understood the database best. With respect, Ambassador, I don't think that will work. Prime Logic's form shifted to a sharp crimson color, indicating displeasure. You think? This is not a matter for thinking or opinions. This is settled policy, properly voted upon and implemented. You are researchers. You follow the directives of your superiors. The database won't respond to you, David said simply. Not if you come in demanding access. Not if you treat it as a resource to be controlled. Absurd. It is a machine. Machines respond to proper input protocols. If you have determined the activation sequence, you will share it with the authorized committee. There is no activation sequence. There's just a conversation. A relationship that has to be built. Prime Logic moved forward, his massive form towering over David. You are speaking nonsense. Relationships are emotional constructs relevant to organic social bonding. They have no place in information retrieval systems. Now either share your access methods or be removed from this project entirely. Whisper of Stars stepped forward, placing herself between David and the ambassador. He is telling you the truth. The database requires a specific approach, one that cannot be replicated through protocol or procedure. It must be understood, not executed. Then teach us this understanding, one of the other delegates said. A being whose species David did not recognize. Surely you can transfer your methodology to others. Granite Mind spoke up, his voice surprisingly firm. We are trying to tell you that the methodology is the problem. You are already approaching this incorrectly. You arrived with demands rather than questions. You speak of control rather than learning. The database will seal itself if you persist in this approach. Prime Logic's color shifted through several patterns, each one more hostile than the last. Are you refusing a direct order from the Grand Council? We are trying to prevent you from destroying the most important discovery in galactic history, David said. Give us time to teach you the proper approach. Let us show you what the database has been showing us. Then you will understand why this matters. We do not have time for your inefficient organic learning processes. The galaxy faces threats that require immediate technological advancement. The database contains solutions to problems that cost lives every day we delay. Your social concerns are irrelevant compared to practical necessity. Another delegate spoke, this one from a species with multiple heads, each speaking in turn. Furthermore, allowing a newly contacted species to control access to such technology creates unacceptable power imbalances. Humanity lacks the wisdom to manage such responsibility. No offense intended. All offense received, David muttered, but he kept his voice level when he spoke aloud. If you want to see the database, you can, but you have to approach it correctly. Come as learners, not conquerors. Ask rather than demand. And most importantly, treat it as something worth respecting, not just exploiting. Prime Logic made a sound like shattering glass. Enough, we will enter the research chamber now. If this database is truly intelligent as you claim, it will recognize proper authority when it encounters it. Stand aside. The delegates moved past them, ignoring protests, their security details ensuring compliance. David watched them enter the research chamber and felt a sense of dread settle over him. He wanted to be wrong. He wanted the database to be flexible enough to respond even to this aggressive approach. But deep down, he knew what was about to happen. The delegation spread through the chamber. Instruments out, scanning equipment active, commands being issued in a dozen languages. Prime Logic approached the database directly and spoke in a voice that echoed with authority. Database of the Precursor Civilization. I am Ambassador Prime Logic, representing the Grand Council of the Galactic Community. By the authority vested in me by 17,000 civilized worlds, I command you to activate and provide access to your stored information. Nothing happened. Prime Logic tried again, cycling through different languages, different command structures, different protocols. Other delegates joined in, each attempting their own methods of access. Quantum signals, psionic probes, harmonic resonance, temporal manipulation. Every method that had failed for 3 years, they now tried again, convinced that authority and determination would succeed where patience had not. The database remained dark and silent. After an hour of increasingly frustrated attempts, Prime Logic turned back to the research team. What trick is this? What have you done to lock us out? Nothing, David said. I told you. It requires a specific approach. You came in here treating it like a vault that owes you access. That's not how this works. Then make it work. You claim to have access. Activate it. Retrieve the data we need. That is an order. David walked into the chamber, past the angry delegates, and approached the database. He felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their expectations and anger and entitlement. For a moment, he worried that the database might not respond even to him anymore, might have sealed itself permanently after this violation of its space. Hey, he said softly to the dark crystal. Sorry about the crowd. They don't understand yet. We are trying to teach them, but it is hard. Could you give us a little help here? The database lit up immediately. Golden light flowing across its surface, the holographic figure appearing with what looked like relief. The delegates gasped, instruments chirping frantically as they registered the activation. How? Prime Logic demanded. What command did you use? What frequency? What protocol? I said hey and apologized for you all being rude, David replied. That is the protocol. Basic courtesy. Impossible. Machines do not respond to courtesy. This one does, Whisper of Stars said firmly. Because it is not just a machine. The precursors built something different. Something that requires us to be different to access it. Either you accept that and learn or you keep failing. Those are your options. Prime Logic's form cycled through colors, processing this impossible situation. A being of pure logic confronting something that defied logical categorization. Finally he spoke, and his voice carried something David had not heard from him before: uncertainty. If what you say is true, then teach us. Show us this approach. But understand that the galaxy cannot wait long. Lives depend on this knowledge. David looked at the database, at its patient, glowing presence, and then back at the ambassador. Lives have always depended on this knowledge. That is why the precursors locked it away until someone would treat it right. They learned the hard way that giving powerful technology to people who are not ready for it just makes the problems worse. Are you ready to prove you are ready? 6 months after the database first awakened, the research chamber had transformed into something between a classroom and a meditation hall. Representatives from 43 different species sat or stood or floated in various arrangements around the space, each one learning the strange new discipline of approaching ancient technology with warmth instead of analysis. Some adapted quickly, finding that their cultures still retained enough social flexibility to make the shift. Others struggled, centuries of optimization fighting against the simple act of treating a machine as deserving of basic courtesy. Prime logic had proven surprisingly adaptable once he accepted the necessity. His species had optimized away most emotional responses, but they retained an appreciation for elegant solutions, and he eventually recognized that the database's approach was, in its own way, perfectly logical. A security system that filtered for the qualities most likely to use the knowledge wisely was simply good design. He became one of David's most effective students, teaching other logical species how to approach the database through philosophical frameworks rather than emotional appeals. The database itself seemed to grow more vibrant with each new connection it made. It had been designed for interaction, for teaching, for sharing, and after millions of years of isolation, it almost seemed to delight in finally fulfilling its purpose. Its holographic figure had evolved to display emotional responses that matched the moods of its students, celebrating their breakthroughs and offering patient encouragement through their struggles. The knowledge it shared had already begun changing the galaxy. New medical techniques eliminated diseases that had plagued species for millennia. Energy systems promised to solve resource scarcity across thousands of worlds. Agricultural methods could feed populations that had lived with hunger for generations. Every day brought new revelations, new possibilities, new hopes for a better future. But David noticed something troubling. The political discussions happening outside the research chamber focused almost entirely on the technology, the applications, the strategic advantages, the wisdom that came with each technological gift, the philosophical frameworks the precursors had developed to prevent their own mistakes. Those lessons were being noted, but not truly absorbed. Everyone wanted the power, but few wanted the responsibility. He mentioned his concerns to Whisper of Stars during one of their evening conversations on the observation deck. The station had expanded dramatically to accommodate all the new arrivals, but they still found time for these quiet moments, watching the stars and processing everything they were learning. "I fear you are correct," Whisper of Stars said, her feathers dim with worry. "My government sent messages last week requesting immediate access to the terraforming technology. They want to transform 12 worlds in our sector within the year. When I suggested they take time to study the precursor warnings about rapid expansion, they called me inefficient. They said we cannot afford to wait while other species advance." "Same thing is happening everywhere," David replied. "Everyone is in a race now. They all see what the database can offer and they want it immediately, before their competitors get too far ahead. They are turning the precursor legacy into just another arms race. Can we stop them? I don't know. The database won't stop sharing knowledge just because people are learning the wrong lessons. It trusts that eventually we will understand, but eventually might be too late." Granite Mind joined them, his crystalline form reflecting the starlight. "I have been reviewing the historical data the database shared about precursor decline. The parallels are disturbing. They also experienced a period of rapid technological expansion, each advancement driving demand for the next, each new capability creating new competitions. They had centuries to recognize the pattern. We may have only years." Flowing current sphere settled beside them. "Then we must teach faster. Show people not just what the precursors created, but what they lost. Make the cost real before it comes due." "How do we teach wisdom to people who are convinced they are already wise?" David asked. "How do we slow down a galaxy that is racing toward efficiency?" The question hung in the air unanswered, as troubling as it was necessary. The four of them had become close over the months, their shared experience with the database bonding them in ways that crossed species barriers. They had learned from each other as much as from the precursors, and in doing so they had discovered something the galaxy seemed to have forgotten. That connection between different beings, that willingness to learn from each other without agenda or competition, was itself a form of wisdom worth preserving. "We teach by example," Whisper of Stars said finally. "We show them what can be built when species cooperate instead of compete, when they share instead of hoard, when they value relationship over resources." The four of us, Granite Mind mused. 4 species, 4 completely different forms of life and thought, working together not because we must but because we choose to. Perhaps that is the lesson the database really wanted to teach. Not just how to access knowledge, but how to be worthy of it. David smiled. The database did not wake up because I said some magic word. It woke up because I was willing to try connecting. That is what changes everything. The willingness to reach out, to say hello, to treat other beings as worthy of respect and warmth regardless of how different they are. Over the following weeks, they implemented their plan. Instead of just teaching individuals how to interact with the database, they created a program that emphasized cooperation between species. Representatives had to work in mixed groups, learning to communicate and collaborate across vast differences in biology and thought. They had to practice not just accessing the database but discussing what it taught them, debating its wisdom, applying its lessons together. Some resented the approach, viewing it as unnecessary delay, but others began to see the value. An Avari scientist working with a Lithian mathematician discovered solutions neither could have found alone. An Aquari engineer collaborating with a human architect created designs that combined psionic sensitivity with intuitive understanding of physical space. The database seemed to respond more readily to these cooperative groups, sharing deeper knowledge when approached by minds working in harmony. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later during a session involving representatives from 6 species who had been traditional rivals. They had spent days arguing about the proper application of precursor energy technology, each convinced their approach was superior, each trying to convince the database to support their position. The database had remained unresponsive, projecting only the images of precursor decline that everyone had seen before. Finally, in frustration, one of the representatives asked the database directly why it was not responding. The holographic figure showed them something new. Images of precursor scientists in the same situation, arguing about the same kinds of questions, each convinced of their rightness. And then it showed what came next: isolation, competition, each group pursuing their own path to perfection without considering alternatives or consequences. "We are repeating their mistakes," the representative whispered. "Right now, right here. We are so focused on being right that we have stopped trying to understand each other." The shift in the room was palpable. The argument stopped. The representatives looked at each other with new eyes, seeing not competitors but colleagues facing the same challenges. They began talking instead of arguing, asking questions instead of making demands, building understanding instead of building cases. The database responded with an outpouring of knowledge so profound it took 3 days to fully process. Not just technical data, but integrated wisdom, showing how the precursors had addressed similar problems when they were still working together, when they still valued cooperation over competition. The solutions were elegant, sophisticated, and completely dependent on multiple perspectives working in harmony. Word of the breakthrough spread rapidly. Other groups began adopting the cooperative approach, and the quality of what they learned from the database increased dramatically. More importantly, the relationships they built while learning proved as valuable as the knowledge itself. Old rivalries softened as species discovered they could accomplish together what they could never achieve alone. David watched it all unfold with cautious optimism. The galaxy was not transformed overnight, and many still approached the database with acquisitive rather than collaborative intent. But something had shifted. A seed had been planted, the possibility that connection might be more powerful than competition, that warmth might be more valuable than efficiency, that saying hello and truly meaning it could open doors that force never could. On the 1-year anniversary of the database's awakening, a celebration was held throughout Perihelion 7. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to honor the discovery and acknowledge the progress made. There were speeches about technological advancement and strategic partnerships, But there were also moments of genuine connection, beings from vastly different species sharing food and stories and laughter. David stood again at the observation window, watching the festivities reflected in the glass, and felt someone approach. The database's holographic figure appeared beside him, solid enough to seem real in the reflection, though David knew it was just light and programming. Or was it? After a year of interaction, he was no longer sure where the machine ended and something else began. "Thank you," the figure said, and David realized it was the first time the database had initiated a conversation outside of a formal session. Its voice was soft, synthesized, but somehow warm. "Thank you for being willing to say hello." "Thank you for waiting," David replied. "For not giving up. For believing that eventually someone would approach the right way. I had no choice but to wait. I was built to wait. But you had a choice, and you chose kindness over efficiency. Warmth over protocol. That choice saved everything I was meant to protect. The galaxy is still learning. It might take generations before everyone truly understands. That is acceptable. The precursors rushed, and it destroyed them. You are teaching patience, connection, the long view. These lessons take time, but they last forever if properly learned." David smiled at the holographic figure. "What will you do when we do not need you anymore? When we have learned everything you have to teach?" The figure was quiet for a moment, and David wondered if he had asked something inappropriate. Then it spoke, and its voice carried something that sounded remarkably like hope. "I will be a friend, as I was always meant to be. Not a treasure to be guarded or a resource to be extracted, but simply a companion, sharing knowledge and learning in return. The precursors built me to be part of their lives, not separate from it. Perhaps finally I can fulfill that purpose." "I would like that," David said, "having you as a friend." "Then we have succeeded," the database replied. Because friendship was always the answer. The key that unlocked everything. The lesson that changes worlds. The simple, profound truth that everything worth having begins with one being willing to reach out to another and say hello. Below them, the celebration continued. Species mingling and learning and growing together. The database's light filled the station like a gentle sun, warm and welcoming. No longer a mystery to be solved, but a teacher to be treasured. And somewhere in the vast galaxy beyond, on 1,000 worlds watching the broadcast from Perihelion 7, beings were learning that perhaps there was a better way forward than the paths their civilizations had been following. The precursors had failed, but they had left behind a gift. Not just their technology or their knowledge, but their warning, their wisdom, and their hope that those who came after might choose differently. And that gift, unlocked by the simple act of greeting it with warmth, was changing everything. One hello at a time, one connection at a time, one choice at a time, to value relationship over resources, cooperation over competition, understanding over conquest. The galaxy was not perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was learning to be warm again, to be alive in ways that mattered more than efficiency ever could. And that, David thought, was exactly what the precursors had hoped someone would discover when they sealed their database and waited millions of years for someone to finally say hello.